If you bought one of these brand new, you might want to skip ahead a few seconds because this is going to be hard to watch. I'll actually go as far as saying this is easily my favorite generation of BMW interiors.
Okay, look, before we get started, just pause the video, go and make yourself a cup of tea, get a couple of biscuits, and then get really comfortable because we've got a lot to talk about and most of it's pretty sad.
Because when we spoke to one of the techs regarding this issue, his exact words were, mate, don't ask how much, okay? Now, we need to start this video with a warning because there's a high chance that what you're about to see is going to give you the impression that the car behind me is a complete nightmare of a thing and you'd be mad to buy one. But that's not necessarily the case. See, when researching this video and talking to the owners and techs that work on them day to day, the vast majority of people that live with these cars absolutely adore them. Many claim that this 4th generation X5 is easily the best car they've ever owned. However, even some of the best examples out there can be guilty of a host of problems. So how about we uncover what they are? Let's get into this from the rear. First up, there are plenty of reports from owners about the tailgates and the tail lights getting a bit rattly with age. Don't stress about this, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. A lot of this stuff just needs to be adjusted correctly. And don't go running off to your BMW dealership to get that done because they'll charge you a small fortune. Instead, check out the owners groups and forums. There's plenty of advice on how to fix all this stuff. Oh, just a quick note as well. This generation's X5 is basically the same as the X6, just that the rear end treatment is a little bit different. But the biggest complaint you might find with the X6 is that it exists at all. Now, we're going to be covering that abomination of a car as we go through the video, but just know the X5 and X6, all the issues we're going to be talking about, they go for both cars. Okay, next up, just check that the door handles, pieces of trim, and even the inner wheel arches are all attached properly because we did find reports from owners stating that certain clips and screws were missing even from the factory, and these things over time can wear loose. Now, next up, while we're back here, plenty of models are fitted with air suspension. Now, when it's working, it's absolutely fabulous. We'll get to that when we drive this thing. The problem is, plenty of owners have had some issues with it. Basically, it might just be something like a sensor. That's pretty easy to fix and inexpensive. Other owners have had problems with compressors or even leaking lines through the entire system, especially at the rear of the car. And to fix that, it could cost you all of the monies. Although it's not what we would call a common issue as such. It is reported, but it's kind of a handful of owners at the moment. Now, there are some complaints about some suspension stuff at the front of the car. We'll cover that when we get into driving it. But no matter what, you might want to budget for tires and brakes and maybe even wheels way more often than you're anticipating. And that's because these things are a pretty heavy sled. They weigh over 2 tons. And for it to retain BMW's ultimate driving machine characteristics, it does mean it's very, very heavy on its tires, especially the front ones. And to perform it at its best, it needs premium quality tires. They're going to be expensive. And the same can be said for the brakes and even the wheels. It seems like the wheels don't enjoy the X5's copious mass because there are plenty of reports of these rims cracking. Actually, a mate of mine is a highway patrol cop here in New South Wales. That means an X5 is one of his work vehicles. And one of the most commonly replaced items on the New South Wales highway patrol fleet are replacement rims on X5s. And look, we totally understand that highway patrol are way harsher on their vehicles than pretty much anyone else, but we're not talking about cracked rims due to smashing into gutters. This is just general use. Plus, plenty of regular owners are reporting cracked rims as well. But we have a hot tip on all of this. See, plenty of owners have found that aftermarket rims and brakes and just general components can often last longer, perform better, and cost substantially less than the BMW OEM stuff. And our hot tip when it comes to these aftermarket parts and accessories is to check out our mates at Automotive Superstore via the link down there. They carry a huge range of stuff. You've got to check them out. They're mates of ours, they're legends. Check them out. Now, next up, plenty of owners have reported issues with the central locking just not working. Sometimes this can just be an actuator, cheap and easy fix. Other times it can be the module that controls the doors playing up. Then other times it can be a far more insidious electronic issue. We're going to get into the electronic issues more soon because that is, unfortunately, a can of worms that we do need to open. Now, next up, the sunroofs, and this is an interesting one. It seems that, especially in hot climates like here in Australia, some X5s are having a problem where the sunroof seals are shrinking, and some of them, after even 4 years, require all new seals so the thing doesn't leak. But what could be a bigger issue with this is that plenty of owners are totally unaware that this is an issue at all because plenty of those that service and maintain these never check the seals. Plus, remember, any water leaking inside the cabin can just exacerbate the electronic issues. And we're going to get to them soon, just be patient. But do your homework on this, because according to some of the techs we spoke to, there are those out there 3D printing little spaces that you can jam into the gaps, and this saves you from having to replace all the seals or potentially pay the exorbitant fees that BMW dealerships will charge you to fix it. But on the topic of water leakage issues, the shark fin antenna, it can be guilty of leaking as well, and this can cause more electronic issues. We'll uncover that more when we get inside. But look, we now really should open the can of worms that can be the exterior electronic issues. There doesn't seem to be one or two or three major things. It's just a random sporadic smattering of different issues that can happen. Although in saying that, the vast majority of owners out there, like Chris that owns this car, have never experienced an issue with the exterior electronics. However, plenty of other owners have had the polar opposite experience. For example, the PDC, or the park distance control, can sometimes not sense an object there, or it phantom senses an object that's not actually there. Then we have the power windows, which might not go up. They might not go down, or maybe they'll go halfway and just give up. The front grille is extremely clever because it can open and close for heat management and aerodynamics. However, some owners have had it stop opening and closing over time. Also on the headlights, the DRLs. There are plenty of reports of these flickering or fading over time, or just failing completely. Sometimes it's just the chip that controls it, or sometimes it's the module, it can melt. Now, if the car is out of warranty, before you go running back to BMW to have it fixed, jump on the owners groups and forums, because there are fixes to these issues with the DRLs. In saying that though, make sure you have it fixed properly, because some owners that haven't had it fixed properly, it leads to other electronic problems with the whole car down the track. Now, for models fitted with the laser headlights, these are the ones with these little blue sections on them, look, chances are you're not going to have a problem. Most owners never ever do. But pray you don't, because if these sections in here crack and fall down, which they can, you can't actually get in there and fix it. You've actually got to replace the entire headlight cluster. Now look, if the car's in warranty, BMW should sort this out. If the car's out of warranty, have a guess how much one owner was quoted for one new headlight cluster. It was over $9,000. Oh my God. But the good news here is that the majority of X5s on the market don't feature laser headlights, so you won't need to sell a kidney to fix it. Now, one other complaint we came across, actually more from prospective buyers, was that when trying to work out which X5 to buy, it can be confusing because the range is just so huge. So let's try to simplify it. Let's break it down. Firstly, this generation can be split into two iterations, pre and post update, or LCI as BMW call it. The update revised the grille and bumpers, added new LED head and tail lights, changed up the interior design thanks to the inclusion of iDrive 8.5 with its big curved display. Not to mention it included a host of other tech and equipment updates. Plus, LCI introduced a 48-volt mild hybrid system across petrol and diesel models, and power increased especially on the plug-in hybrid and the petrol inline 6. Also on those models and various engines, it seems that this is where BMW seem hell-bent on confusing you, because the range that's on offer is just ridiculous. I mean, check this out. But look, back to this generation of X5 and X6, if that is still not enough choice for you for some insane reason, you then have the various option and feature packs, not to mention just the individual optional extras out there. But remember, all of these things can change depending on the model of the car, the year it was made, and what direction the wind was blowing that particular day. And thanks to this enormous range available, pricing on the used market can vary massively. At the very lowest end of the range, you're looking at around about $35,000 on the Aussie used market. At the top end of the range, around about $175,000. But this is only part of the story, because we need to talk about depreciation. And quick tip, if you bought one of these brand new, you might want to skip ahead a few seconds, because this is going to be hard to watch. On average, the X5 and X6 are some of the worst performing cars available when it comes to depreciation. And if the previous generation is any indication of the future for this one, by the time these are 10 years old, they could lose as much as 80% of their value. And look, obviously this can vary depending on the specific model and the condition and the year, all that sort of stuff. We totally get it. But to give you an idea, this actual car retailed for over $170,000 when brand new. On the used market now, at best, it's going to to fetch about $75,000. That means it's lost nearly $100,000 in value in just 6 years. And similar can be said for many of its competitors. The Mercedes-Benz GLE, Audi Q7 and Q8, the Land Rover Discovery and Range Rover Sport, they all do their best impressions of the Titanic when it comes to retaining value. The Volvo XC90 and Genesis GV70 are currently pretty decent performers when it comes to the residuals, thanks to a high pre-owned demand at the moment. But easily, this segment's best financial performer is the Lexus RX. It might also top the charts for build quality and reliability as well, but that's for another video. But look, how about we stop focusing on the negatives for a moment and just focus on the positives, and that means talking about exterior design, because I think this is a stunning looking vehicle. I'm a massive, massive fan of the design of the original X5, and I just feel that this generation, it's done such a great job at being a modern interpretation of that original classic. Also, isn't it funny that when this model first came out, plenty of people criticised this grille for being way too large, but now that we've had just a run of hideous looking new BMWs, this doesn't seem to be quite as bad. Also, I don't know about you, but I can't decide if I prefer the pre-update looks or the LCI design. The changes are pretty subtle and they both look great, although many owners are claiming that the updated LCI car's build quality and fit and finish isn't quite as good as these pre-update models. For example, on the LCI models, some of the finishes and paint around the exhaust outlet starting to chip and fall away. However, if you're hell-bent on communicating to everyone around you that you have absolutely no taste, maybe the X6 is for you. And not only is it dramatically uglier, it's less practical and it's harder to see out of. It's basically all negatives. Luckily though, the X5 and X6 interiors are nearly identical, and that's a really good thing. I'll actually go as far as saying this is easily my favorite generation of BMW interiors. And I do mean the pre-LCI interior. Look, that I get BMW have to, keep up with the times, hence the huge wraparound screen on the LCI update. But I just like that this pre-update, it isn't as reliant on that big screen in terms of design. And I also agree with plenty of owners out there, the pre-LCI car with actual physical buttons is just easier to live with. The LCI cars are much more reliant on the touch screen, and I just think that sucks. You know what else sucks? The potential interior problems and common complaints in here, and we have to take you through those now. And let's start with the seats, which are incredibly comfortable, really supportive, great amounts of adjustment, great seats. Until they start creaking or making weird noises. This one, not at all, but plenty of owners have had issues with weird, strange sounds coming from the seats. Next up, the HVAC system, which, look, chances are you're not going to have a problem, but some owners have had issues with it. It can be the condenser, it can be the evaporator, whatever it is, often it requires the dashboard to come out of the car. Now, according to some owners, they've been quoted in excess of 20 hours to fix this at the dealership. And if the car's not covered under warranty, some of the quotes we've seen range from $5,000 to over $8,500. And then we come to the interior electronic gremlins, and it's very similar to the exterior here. There doesn't seem to be one problem, it can just be a variety of things that can play up. But look, it's important to remember, these cars are loaded with tech and features, and that means that there's multiple modules in the car, and they all have to get along swimmingly while also dealing with heat and vibrations, and potentially excessive amounts of moisture, but we'll get into that soon. But what are the issues that have been reported? Well, the electronic steering wheel controls and the seat adjustment controls, these apparently can sort of adjust to a point and then stop, or they just don't stop at all, or they just fail completely. And then we have the spectacular interior ambient lighting, which looks amazing at night when it works, because for some owners they've had like the left hand side will illuminate but then the right hand side won't, or maybe the dash section will illuminate but then the doors don't, or vice versa, who knows. Then there are reports of malfunctioning gauges, or the displays start to flicker weirdly, or you'll get warning lights pop up when there's no problem with the car at all. Now, the root cause of a lot of these problems, it might be just a faulty sensor, or it might require a software update, or maybe it's some dodgy wiring, but it might also be something like the auxiliary battery pumping out weird voltage amounts, or the ADAS system requiring calibrations. The issue here is that all of these things, they all have to get along with each other. So if one system fails, it can end up being like a domino effect and taking out a whole bunch of other systems. Now, remember before when I was talking about issues due to water ingress from like the sunroof and the shark fin antenna? With that shark fin antenna, if that leaks water into the roof, there's a telematics module in the back there. When that gets wet, it can create not just dramas with the electronic systems in here, but also with the infotainment system. Now, the good news on that telematics system, but it's actually really, really easy to replace. There are plenty of tutorials online about it. You might need to take it to the dealer to get it reprogrammed or find a remote coder to do it, but that's not that big of a drama. And also, if you do it yourself, you could potentially save yourself a couple of $1,000s compared to what a BMW dealership might charge you to fix it. Also, just on the infotainment systems, good news here first. BMW's iDrive is easily one of the best infotainment systems you're ever going to come across. It's so intuitive and just easy to use. It all makes sense. Its depth of ability, I'll go as far as saying that even the geekiest of owners are going to use maybe 10% of its potential, even at absolute best. Also, I agree with plenty of owners out there, the pre-LCI update system, this is the one to get. Post, yeah, not as intuitive to use and too much touchscreen. But now the bad news about it, and this is for pre and post update cars, there are plenty of owners out there that have reported like this whole system locking up or just completely turning off so the screens go completely blank. Even weird things like Apple CarPlay disconnecting when going through like a toll checking section, like the e-tags, that can play havoc because there's so much other electrical interference happening with the infotainment system. Oh, also plenty of owners highly recommend not using the wireless phone charger because for many out there, it will just fry your phone. But again, remember, there are thousands of owners out there that have never had any of these issues. Even with my mate on the police force, I asked him about the electronic issues and he stated that even though they treat their vehicles so harshly and they're filled with a bunch of other electronics in here, they've never really had a problem. And the small issues that have popped up, super easy to fix, just a software update or restart the car and the problem is solved. Although this then raises another complaint from owners regarding some of the remote software updates. Plenty of owners have had problems where the car is stuck in a transferring data to car mode for up to 3 weeks. And then when it's finally finished, it then restarts all over again. So you've got the same problem again for another 3 or 4 weeks. Nightmare. Plus, if the root issue isn't solved with a software update or restarting the car or a new battery, well, then it can become like this treasure hunt where each failing component just gives you clues to what the next failing component is going to be. But all of those things are going to cost a lot of money to sort out. And then there's the build quality and fit and finish. And look, plenty of owners that have owned this generation and the previous F15 generation have stated that this generation is leagues ahead in terms of build quality and fit and finish. Although that's not saying much because we've reviewed the F15 generation of X5 and yeah, it's got some issues. The link for that video is down below. However, plenty of other owners that have gone from a pre-LCI car like this to a post-LCI car mentioned that it's these earlier examples that have far better fit, finish, and just overall build quality. But unfortunately, both iterations can be guilty of some bloody annoying quality issues. There are plenty of videos and photos online showing that on some models you can see the airbag sort of console underneath the dashboard, like the top of the dashboard's too thin, so it's too obvious. And then in hot climates like here in Australia with leather dashboards like this one, sometimes the leather is starting to pull away from the head-up display plastic shroud a little bit, and that just looks cheap and nasty. Also, the isolation between the plastic panels on the doors and the dashboard and all the trim pieces is honestly pretty underwhelming. What I mean is that when you pull on things or push on things, like everything kind of makes creaking and squeaking noises, and this stuff generally gets worse with age and kilometers. Even stuff like the plastic steering wheel, console surround here, and lower plastics in the cabin, it just doesn't feel quite right. But this is an area that brands like Genesis and Lexus just absolutely nail. Those interiors throughout their entire cars and lineup, they just feel like they're built like bank vaults. But BMW, Audi, Land Rover, and especially Mercedes-Benz of late, just feels like they've dropped the ball. And another area that the Euros can be a bit disappointing compared to a Lexus RX or a Genesis GV70, actually even a Hyundai Santa Fe and a Kia Sorento for that matter, is when it comes to the levels of standard equipment on offer. Look, don't get me wrong, the X5 is still loaded with toys, way more than you'll ever really need, but it's just disappointing that all the really interesting and fun stuff is generally only available with expensive optional extra packages, whereas in something like a Hyundai Santa Fe or even the Sorento, it just comes as standard. Also, the practicality in here, for me, is a little bit hit and miss as well. Like, This is excellent storage under here with your power outlet and whatnot. And the way this opens feels quite premium. But then the way this opens, it just doesn't, it feels a bit cheap as well. You've got 2 cup holders down there, and they're also heated or cooled, and they will hold a small pretentious coffee like a double ristretto with a dash of oat milk. Amazing door bins, probably some of the best door bins I've ever seen. Not only are they huge, but they're super easy to get things in and out of. That little spot there is going to collect dust and filth and crap. You've got little storage down here, which is felt lined for your coins and whatnot. Oh, sunglasses. What does Chris wear? He wears Carve, or is it Carve? Nice sunglasses, mate. You've got nowhere for sunglasses up there though. There's no little net down there. Pretty good sized glove box there. So yeah, it's okay for practicality up front. Door bins are great. Now in the back seat, I'm exactly 32 centimeters taller than celebrity X5 owner Reese Witherspoon. 32 centimeters taller. I shouldn't need a ladder to get into one of these. Anyway, this is in my driving position. Fantastic. Great amount of foot room, heaps of knee room. The windows are really large, so you don't feel claustrophobic at all. The seats are so comfortable. And I don't know how the squidge works, but it sort of feels like you got a bit of support as well when you kind of sit in it and, you know, get wrapped up by the seat. The quality of everything also feels really, really premium. And again, according to the owners, for backseat wear and tear, generally pretty good, no matter which interior trim spec you've gone with. And then as far as features and practicality back here, you've got a little storage spot here which will fit your phone quite nicely. Power outlet there, your own air conditioning controls, air vents there, little flippy down pockets at the back. This is USB-C charging ports, that's fantastic. And there's like an optional entertainment thing you can get to clip an iPad into there or whatever you want. Door bins, and you can actually get to them if you've got legs. There's also air vents just here. You've got pull down armrest here which has more flippy outy cup holders, more storage under here for, who can name what this is? Sam, do you know what this is? I think it's a Sonic toy, isn't it? Sonic the Hedgehog? Pretty sure that's who it is. That'll rattle around in there. Oh, shit, sorry. Also, ISOFIX points, super easy to get to these, and the doors open nice and wide, so getting a baby seat in and out isn't a drama at all. I really like the back seat of this thing. It's excellent. Then in the boot, in terms of practicality, it's actually pretty good. In fact, it comes third in this category of car with the second row in place. The X6, however, it comes second last, but at least it still takes out first place for being the ugliest. And look, obviously with the second row down, it is huge in here, although it doesn't lay completely flat. That's just a little bit annoying. But the real party piece is this split tailgate. This thing's absolutely fantastic. If you've got a heap of crap in here, when you open the boot, things don't just instantly roll out. If you've got kids and you need to change their shoes for sport, you just sit them here and change their shoes. If you're going snowboarding, it means you can kind of sort your snowboard out or pack it away and the interior of the boot doesn't get soaking wet. Also, this is another cool aspect of it. Sorry, that was my fault. This split tailgate design, I've had this on a couple of cars, and it's not until you don't have it that you realize just how much you miss this, because it's just genius to have this as storage. One more thing, I love this. How nice does that feel? There's a gas strut for the floor, so it just feels premium for the one section of the car you'll hardly ever use. However, a quick warning, make sure any example you're looking at on the used market has the parcel blind shelf thing, because guess how much a replacement is from BMW? $1,500. How the hell do they justify that? How is it worth 1,500 bucks? It's not. Now, before we get into what these are like to drive, something that's currently driving us crazy is the fact that it seems around about 3/4 of you that watch our videos on a regular basis haven't subscribed. Why not? Because you subscribing to ReDriven just allows us to make more free videos for you. Surely that's a good thing, yeah? And if you're feeling extra generous, why not consider joining our membership program? The link for that is down there. It's right near the link for the free cheat sheet on this very car. This is a must read if you're in the market, because we've listed out all the common issues so you don't have to remember everything we've covered in this video. Actually, one of the perks that you're going to get being a member is that you'll get to find out what cars we're filming ahead of time, and we're going to do our absolute best to answer your burning questions about that car in the video. For example, Foghorn Lebhorn wanted to know about the towing capacity of these. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on the mechanical package, but it ranges from 2,700 kilos to 3,500 kilos. However, in saying that, as we always say, towing something that's heavier than the tow vehicle itself is just asking for disaster. Also, those figures are for braked towing. Unbraked towing capacity is 750 kilos across the board. Next up, Cars from Oz is asking about replacement tires. Now, this is an interesting one because according to the owners and the research we've done, it's critical that the tread wear between the front and rear tires have to be within 5 millimeters of each other. If it's more than that, it can put all this excess strain on things like the transfer case and the diffs, and that can cause all sorts of horrible dramas. Jim's going to elaborate on that more in a moment. But the problem with this is that it means that the rolling diameter of the tires has to be very, very accurate. This can mean that you're limited to what tires can go on the car. In fact, in some markets, some owners mentioned that they've had their warranty voided because the car was wearing not the original make and model of tire that came on the car from factory. And obviously getting your tires from BMW for X5 specific tires is going to be bloody expensive. Anyway, to the driving experience of the X5, is there any bad news? Yeah, of course there is. Now, as I alluded to before, the front suspension can have a few issues. This is actually really common in this entire category of car, but the bushes on the control arms can wear out prematurely. It's just a thing that happens. When you're test driving it, feel for any sort of clunks or rattles coming from the suspension, or if the car sort of feels a bit loose at all. If you don't get these sorted out, it can have a dramatic effect on the ride quality, on the handling, and you can chew through tires at a rate of knots. Next up on the test drive, just feel if the car is pulling to one side or another. Best case scenario here, it just needs a wheel alignment. That's easy done and not expensive. However, it could also be a host of steering components on their way out. Pray it's not that, because when we spoke to one of the techs regarding this issue, his exact words were, mate, don't ask how much, okay? Now, another common complaint is that the OEM wiper blades, as they wear out, they just shudder violently. They do a crap job at wiping, and also they just wear out prematurely. Plus, what BMW will charge you for replacement OEM blades, it's like daylight robbery. So to avoid all of those things, just hit the Wipertech link below, because you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. They are the only wiper blades we use. They're an absolute breeze to order and fit, and they're a great Aussie company, and they're our mates. So support them. The link's down there. Although you know somebody that won't have to do any of that, it's Chris that owns this car, because we're going to give him a set for free as a thank you present. We're going to give you a set for free as soon as you lend us your car. As I said before, my email's down there, or message us on the socials. But easily the biggest issue you're going to find with an X5 is that after about 30 seconds to a minute of driving, you're going to just completely ignore all of the common issues that we've raised so far. This thing is such an utterly wonderful car to drive, and that's why it could be so dangerous for you. Look, I don't know how the engineers have done this, but it nails that whole BMW ultimate driving machine wank sales tag thing. But at the same time, it's completely refined and it feels premium. It basically does everything that you would want a car in this category to do so well. The air suspension, so good in the different modes. In sport, it handles really, really nicely, but it's never uncomfortable. But in comfort, it just wafts along and gives you this premium feeling the whole time. Also, and look, I know some owners have complained that there can be a few rattles and stuff, but in this one, nah, not at all. I've actually gone hunting for some rough roads to try to hear for some interior creaks and noises. It doesn't, it's just silent. Also, look, it is a big unit of a car, but it never feels it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the excellent visibility out. Normally SUVs like this, it's really hard to judge some of the exterior, perimeter of the car, but in this, no, parking's a breeze, dealing with traffic, easy. And then we've got to talk about this engine. Look, this is the M50D. That means it has more torque than even the X5M model. And oh my God, it is outrageous. You will know how much torque it's got because when you floor it, what happens, your internal organs, they somehow find the gaps in the vertebrae in your spine as they all squish back heading towards the seat. But the problem with this huge amount of torque is that the minute you flex your right foot, you're going so quickly, so fast, that you don't actually get enough time to enjoy the process of accelerating. And it also means that you're into, good morning, officer, of illegal speeds. And look, let's be honest, a 30D or a 40D or a 40i, that's all the levels of performance you're ever really going to need in the real world. And even their overall dynamic abilities, they are so far beyond what any normal driver would need 99% of the time. They are that capable. This one, however, this steps things up a notch or 5. It is, okay, granted, hilariously fun until you get caught. Look, overall, in terms of the driving experience, the X5 is easily up there with the best in this class. In fact, I might go as far as saying it is the best in this class, and you can just feel yourself falling for the charm and charisma of it every passing kilometre. But remember, buying a car with your heart and not your head can result in an absolute disaster. And speaking of disasters, mechanically what goes wrong with these things? I can't elaborate on that because I'm not a qualified mechanic. But you know who is? It's Jim Kardashian.
I'll start with the petrol engines first, the B series engines. They are part of BMW's modular engine series, which is really good for keeping production costs down. But it also means that some of the problems they share are shared across the whole lot. One of the most common problems we see is oil filter housings. They're made of plastic, which you might be surprised by. They leak coolant and they leak oil. And look, we've seen those fail as low as sort of 50,000 kilometres. So definitely something you're probably going to need to do. The good news here is you can get aftermarket metal versions that actually last much longer. Another common problem we're seeing is the heat management system. They are prone to fail and leak. I should say if your budget allows, while you have all that apart, also do that oil filter housing that I mentioned earlier, because it will need doing at some point. We've actually seen those fail at about 100,000 kilometres, so keep an eye out for it. Now, the majority of the rest of the cooling system, look, it is also made of plastic. There's a whole bunch of bypass pipes and hoses. And yeah, be prepared to replace any of those parts randomly at 100,000 Ks onwards, basically. Now, another problem you might see, and you'll probably get a fault code telling you this, is the Vanos actuators, or the Vanos magnets, some people like to call them. Basically what happens, they can get stuck, or they can start leaking oil as well. If they get stuck, they basically fail to actuate. They're relatively inexpensive, but they are a nightmare to get at. You've got to take the whole cowling off, and they're at the very back of the plastic valve cover. They're a bit of a nightmare. And that valve cover, it is also prone to leaking as well. Not a quick and simple job. You have to take all the injectors out, and it's a bit of a pain to get at, but yeah, they are prone to leaking too, because plastic. Now, as far as non-plastic parts go, there are a few. One of the issues there is the camshaft drive sprockets. They can fail internally. Just be careful if you are looking at that you don't misdiagnose it as a timing chain issue. I just want to loop back to the oil filter housing again, or more importantly, the oil filter inside it. They do a great impression of the Ocean Gate Titan submersible, and they just basically crush in on themselves. You just have to watch out for that and change it regularly. And also when you are changing, just be careful. Sometimes they can fall apart and bits get stuck in there. So yeah, a good quality oil filter every 10,000 kilometres. Now I'm going to talk about the V8 now. Now this engine they call a hot V, but I like to call this engine a hot mess. They sound great and make good horsepower, but they're just way too complicated to make a really good long-term viable prospect. A really common problem owners have is just with cooling system complications. It is very complicated. There's a high temp and a low temp circuit, and there are hoses and fittings everywhere, especially the low temp side. The front of the engine just looks like a spaghetti of hoses. It's really quite impressive, and also terribly unreliable. And by that I mean over time, it's all plastic, right? And over time, you're going to have plastic fittings leaking and hoses just splitting spontaneously. And there are so many. So at some point, it's going to make more economic sense just to replace the whole lot. And it's just going to cost a fortune and take forever. They're also known for fuel injector complications. Problem here is because they're a hot V, the injectors are quite low on the top of the valve covers, and they're quite hard to get at, and they're very expensive too. Owners also see complications with the high pressure fuel pump. They can leak fuel externally and they can just stop pumping, which typically stops the car, but they can also leak fuel internally into the engine. Now, a couple of problems here is that dilutes the oil, and that is not ideal for any high performance engine. The other issue too is you get a lot of fuel vapor in the oil, and as the engine sucks all that in through the fuel breather system, you can get a whole bunch of really weird and air-fuel ratio complications. Yeah, it can be an absolute nightmare to diagnose that one. The turbos are at the top of the engine. One of the problems related to that is the turbo drain pipes. They go into a fitting or a housing in the middle of the valley. That can leak, and when it does, it just fills the whole valley up with oil basically, and it dribbles out a little weep hole or a telltale hole at the back of the valley and just runs down the back of the engine. And the turbo oil supply lines as well, there can be issues there. Again, from all the latent heat that accumulates here, the oil in them basically cooks and they get a whole bunch of carbon or crap, and those pipes can block up. Now, any restriction of oil to the turbos is basically going to affect the turbos and wear them prematurely. Now, I haven't talked about the turbo coolant lines yet, have I? Anyway, yeah, also problematic, very complicated and also affected by heat. There are rubber sections there that get affected by heat. They do have like an insulation material on them that they still go hard and start leaking. They leak coolant into the valley and that can dribble out the back as well. And that can be misdiagnosed because there's a coolant cover on the back of their heads that also leaks. So you've really got to be careful and just not misdiagnose these things. There's just so much to go wrong. Now, I haven't even got into the fact that the cylinder bores can wear prematurely, or the fact that the big end bearings can just spontaneously fail. Look, overall with this V8, it just feels like BMW had no intention of designing this or building it to make it actually last for a decent amount of time. But I do have some good news. The diesels in these are considerably better, sort of. Overall, they are a much simpler engine. They don't have fancy valve trains, there's no Valvetronic, and there is much less to go wrong. One of the things that does go wrong though is the plastic inlet manifolds. They have like a set of swirl flaps in there. The manifolds just get all clogged up with carbon and those swirl flaps do eventually fail and get stuck and the actuators fail. Relatively easy to change and really probably won't break the bank either, so that's sort of good news, right? The map sensor in these, look, it really needs to be taken out every service and cleaned because when it clogs up, it just makes the thing like run like a busted ass. And of course they do have the typical EGR complications. Again, they just get clogged up with soot. And all of the problems with the map sensor or the EGR issues or a boost leak, which they are also known for having, that can also wreak havoc on the DPF. So as I've said this before, don't rush in and fix a DPF until you've made sure everything else is fixed. So yeah, look, the single turbo configuration of this engine is proving to be fairly reliable. As for the quad turbo though, look, yes, so far, fairly reliable, but can you imagine if one or all of those turbos fail in the future, which is, let's face it, probably likely? The cost of that, the complexity of those turbos and the cost is just going to be eye-watering. So yeah, something to think about for the future. Look, as for the hybrids in these, it's really not something that is classed as unreliable. So far, they're not too bad for now, but as time goes on, the hybrid system might be fine, but if the engine's falling apart around it, well, it's really good for nothing then, isn't it? Another fairly well-known problem is the drivetrain, or more importantly, the transfer case. You have to be super careful here about tyre sizes and also uneven wear rates as well. There's been plenty of cases where that transfer case has completely failed. So it has to be serviced and you need to make sure the tyre sizes are exactly right. In fact, it's a good idea if you're getting tyres on these, get 4 brand new ones at the same time, because there's even cases where the rear tyres are worn significantly more than the front, and that has actually caused transfer case issues as well. So 4 new tyres every time. Now I know that sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, but one thing you can do to improve your chances is just service it. And preventative maintenance, but service it every 10,000 kilometres. Avoid the condition-based servicing where they're stretching it out to 20,000 kilometres. That is bad. Do it every 10,000 kilometres. And the same goes for the drive lines as well. Do it every 40,000 Ks. It will massively improve the chances of survival. I'm not saying it's going to mitigate all the issues, but you'd like to think it would help.
But there's something else we need to discuss, and it's critical that you get your head around this and recognise it. So many X5s and X6s on the used market are ex-lease vehicles, and this can all too often mean that critical maintenance and servicing has been missed, through to some cars have actually been just downright abused because the original owner has had no intention of keeping the car for the long term. So look, with that in mind, we think that the only time you should consider buying a used X5 is if you can be absolutely sure that it has been serviced well ahead of schedule, it needs to pass a pre-purchase inspection with flying colours, or it needs to be new enough that it's still covered by a full factory warranty. And this doesn't include used car warranties because unfortunately some of those might not be worth the paper they're written on. But if you can find an example that ticks all of those critical boxes and you can handle the $10,000 or $15,000 or even $20,000 potential repair bill and the ongoing depreciation, yeah, why not? Because if you do find the right X5, just like this one, they can be an awesome SUV. But seriously though, there is a bit of a saying in the car industry that you need to be aware of. It's if you can't afford to buy a brand new BMW, well then you certainly cannot afford to buy a near new BMW that doesn't have a warranty. And look, if this sounds like you, just check out one of these instead.
Now another problem...
But the real party piece, hey, excellent storage here, but more importantly, the way this opens. Okay. Fail to check these things. Well, pricing on the used market. Shut up, mate. Yeah.